American cinematic media has a long history of dampening the adverse effects that racism has on minorities. This long-standing prejudiced slant can be seen in several trends, namely the downplaying of slavery, the inclusion of stereotypes in family media, and the phenomenon of the token minority character. One of the most troublesome and blatantly obvious forms of discrimination in American cinema was, in essence, the rewriting of history to make slavery seem less harmful than it actually was.
Hollywood's interpretation of slavery has been very complex over the last 100 years, due to the fact that many early forms of film downplayed the harshness of it as a concept. Most believe it started with the 1915 film A Birth of a Nation, which really didn't highlight any negative connotations. Here, we see slavery as something lost, instead of the freedom we gained after the Civil War. When slavery was abolished, they were depicted as rampant and hostile, like America needed to put these African Americans somewhere, and the abolishment was America's demise. A clear example of this is when we see Flora chased by Gus. Flora jumps off of a cliff to spare herself from being captured by the black man. The harshness of the scene amplifies the stigma that, the abolishment of slavery, the African Americans will be let loose, free to do whatever they please with the white women of America. Gone with the Wind was a more insightful look at slavery. It focused more on the relationship between slaves and their owners.
Lady, but the way that she eat in front of folks like a bird. And I ain't aiming for you to go to Mr. John Wilkins's and eat like a field hand and gobble like a hog. Fiddle-dee-dee.
If we look at the character of Mammy, we see a stereotypical, one-dimensional slave that is portrayed as more of a servant instead of property. The actress, Hattie McDaniel, is very convincing in her performance as a one-dimensional character, but it is so limited and problematic to the overall picture.
Come on!
Throughout the movie, she never once talks about slavery, even though the Civil War is happening throughout the entirety of the film. The audience members are forced to believe she is so happy with her state, she has no opinion with the outside world at all. Academic scholar Susan V. Donaldson calls it the Gone with the Wind phenomenon. This portrayal of slaves aided popular silences about slavery and its harsh realities until well into the late 20th century. There are many examples of films today that accurately depict the handling of slaves in an explicit way, finally depicting what really happened in the South. One of these movies being 12 Years a Slave. It's so striking when comparing the movies together when handling slaves.
Who says it's quitting time? I said it's quitting time. I was the foreman. I was the one says when it's quitting time at Terror. Quitting time! Quitting time!
I'm sorry, Prissy, but the Army took my horse and carriage. You better come upstairs and I'll see what I can do.
Oh, no, Captain Butler. Mama would wear me out with a cornstalk if I was to go into Miss Watling.
You will strike her until her flesh is rent and meat and blood flow equal.
You understand me?
Gallagher, free hand?
Free hand, you know what that means. He'll starve them and whip them. Didn't you see them? Some of them are sick, underfed. Fury of others.
You weren't so particular about owning slaves.
That was different. We didn't treat them that way.
But even such an iconic film like 12 Years a Slave can be problematic. In the films that handle oppression, it seems that the resolution always involves a white character saving the day. In the one film that depicts slavery in its brutality, it is still undermined by the white savior. The trope that the white character is required to resolve the film. This is clearly demonstrated when Solomon begs Bass for his help.
I will write your letter, sir. And if it brings you your freedom, it will be more than a pleasure. It will have been my duty.
Even with so much growth, we still see an underlying issue in these films dealing specifically with race.
Children and family movies can often seem like a simplistic form of escapism for a younger audience. Films in this category normally feature plots and themes that are straightforward and easy to digest. That isn't to say that it's impossible for movies aimed at youth audiences to provide more complex ideas for older viewers, but for the most part, these films are a fairly simple experience. One major defining element of a children's film is the presence of uncomplicated and easy-to-identify characters. Because early childhood represents an incredibly vital stage of psychological development, the characters and themes consumed by children lay an important precedent in how they view people and the world around them. In a journal published by the Committee on Improving the Health, Safety, and Well-Being of Young Adults, The group states, quote, "Changes in the experiences of future cohorts of young adults will provide a useful measure to the extent of which coming of age in an increasingly diverse society affects the development of racial and ethnic identity, intergroup relations, and evolving conceptions of national identity," unquote. To break that statement down, the committee is expressing the importance of early exposure to racial relations on the future of an individual's perception of race and diversity. It can be said, then, that media aimed at younger audiences plays a seminal role in shaping the way said audiences interact with various ethnic groups as they age. It can also be said, then, that the presence of discrimination and racist stereotypes in youth media is immensely detrimental to an individual's perception of the diverse groups they interact with.
Hi there, nice to see you. Bumblebee tuna? Bumblebee tuna!
One of the most formative names in the family entertainment business is the media giant Disney. While Disney has long remained a common household name, the company has an equally long history of racial insensitivity. This insensitivity dates back to the company's origins, but is especially prevalent in the 1946 film Song of the South. The film follows the adventures of a black character named Uncle Remus, who shares folktales and lessons with the plantation children who he lives by, as well as the animated characters who populate the setting. On one hand, the film seems innately simple and uncomplicated, no doubt a major goal of its creators. On the other, the film represents an immensely problematic depiction of African Americans in 19th century America. The film is purposely ambiguous about where and when it takes place, but it's safe to assume more than a few audience members inferred the setting to be pre-Civil War America. Uncle Remus displays a complete lack of distress towards his situation, seemingly implying that he is content living as a slave. It is also possible that Uncle Remus is a victim of the trend of sharecropping that followed the American Civil War, a system which was very detrimental to African Americans in its own right. As M. Thomas Ing puts it in his essay, Walt Disney's Song of the South and the Politics of Animation, quote, "The major charge against the film was what many saw as an idyllic portrayal of slavery and southern plantation life before the Civil War, the slaves obedient, grateful, and happy with their lot in life," unquote. The film also features one of Disney's most beloved songs, Zippity Doo Dah, which can still be heard prominently playing at Disney World's Splash Mountain attraction.
Without a song, jump right out of it. Zippity doo dah, zippity yay. My oh my, what a wonderful day.
While the film itself has not been distributed in some time, the song remains an enigmatic piece of Disney's trouble-plagued history. Because of its family-friendly veneer and outwardly simple design, Song of the South created a distorted view of slavery that had potential to be gravely detrimental to the psychological development of young audience members.
Wonderful feeling, wonderful day.
A token minority is a character in a cinematic work that is used for their race rather than their significance to plot. The token minority character is a character designed to get minority groups invested in a story. The token character allows the producers to broaden the appeal of their work, making race jokes without feeling bad and avoid criticism for lacking diversity.
My life is ruined because after 30 days I'm going to prison. It's not as bad as I've heard, is it?
Hell yeah, it's bad.
Teach me how to survive in prison the way you did.
Tell me how you know I went to prison.
Given your low economic status.
Wait, what?
Your perceived lack of college education.
Okay.
Statistically, you definitely went to prison.
I'll see you tomorrow, convict.
This trope causes problems with representation. The token minority often stands alone in a cast of white characters, forcing the single minority to represent their race. Token characters are usually a caricature of all of their stereotypes.
What you doing, Cheeto?
Just filling this lobster pot with seawater, little cuz. Old island recipe. Hey, looks like lifeguard camp is winding down.
This shows the selected race as no more than its stereotypes, planting subtle bigotry in the audience's head. Andre Seawood claims that a new form of tokenism is on the rise, hypertokenism. Hypertokenism is the increase of screen time, dramatic stake, and promotional involvement for minorities within white films, while still reserving all of the dramatic agency for the dominant white characters in the end. Dramatic agency is a character's ability to change, influence, or control the circumstances within the story. Hypertokenism is an effective method of securing a black audience for a series of white films. Hypertokenism increases a black character's involvement with the circumstances and screen time while still having the dramatic agency controlled by the white characters in the final act. This allows the black audience to hope that the black character will be given more dramatic agency in the following films in the franchise, thus securing their loyalty to the franchise. The most current example of this is Star Wars: The Force Awakens. In the Star Wars franchise, full dramatic agency is given to the selected character, or the one who is chosen by the Force. By not giving this power to Finn, he is forced into a supporting role for the whites who have been chosen. Throughout the film, Finn fights in dramatically potent situations. Both times, he is defeated, only to be saved by the white leads. The first time he is saved by Han, and the second by Rey.
That lightsaber, it belongs to me. Come get it.
Okay, big deal. Thanks.
Finn is the definition of a hypertoken. He is given a significant portion of screen time and dramatic agency, but is ultimately rendered useless by being knocked out as soon as the third act starts. Finn remains unconscious for the remainder of the film, leaving his story open-ended. This leaves the black audience to wonder if he will get redemption in the next installment. Tokenism and hypertokenism have a dangerous effect on how society views minorities, and can manipulate the minority audience to remain loyal to a franchise.
As of late, Hollywood has seen a rise in minority directors and producers that have allowed for social topics to be pushed from new perspectives. In recent years, the popularity of films such as Moonlight or Get Out, and TV shows such as Atlanta allow for representations of race to be written from within.
Excuse me, sir. Fuck off. I know, right?
And the concepts of racism to be addressed by those on the receiving end. Let's take a look at Jordan Peele's film Get Out. In this movie, we see Chris and his girlfriend, Rose, have reached the meet the parents milestone of dating, and so she invites him to stay at her parents' estate. But the polite ambiance surrounding her family soon gives way to a lurking nightmare. Get Out is a horror film that presents us two different kinds of white racism, each having distasteful impulses. First, there are the friends of Rose's family, who visit in droves for the weekend and address Chris explicitly on the grounds of a broad set of presumptions based entirely on his race, which they use to form a specific connection with him. The perceptions they have of Chris stop at the color of his skin, and there is no personal or individual basis on which to communicate. Kevin Lawrence Henry Jr., a professor of African Studies at University of Arizona, speaks on the separation of color. Whiteness, a socially constructed yet materially manifested ideology, practice, and positionality, operates to secure its symbolic and structural advantage, its dominance, by devaluing, debasing, and depossessing that which is constituted as black. It is these boundaries, or social constructs, that rely on these imposed power structures. The other kind of racism presented is the subtler racism from Rose's quoted liberal family themselves, progressives who seem to hold all races in equal regard, those that claim to barely notice one's race at all.
I mean, boy, I hate the way it looks.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
By the way, I would have voted for Obama for a third term if I could. Best president in my lifetime, hands down.
Peele asserts that any unique features of black identity are denied through this, and while it is suggested that these people most certainly do harbor prejudices, it is by hiding them that they are particularly damaging to the individual and to society. From an interview with NPR, director Peele states, "It was very important to me to just get the entire audience in touch in some way with the fears inherent in being black in this country." Peele says, "Part of being black in this country, and I presume being any minority, is constantly being told that we're seeing racism where there just isn't racism." And that is what this film creates. It brutally exposes to the audience the facade of tolerance that many Americans put up. While both forms of racism are inherently wrong, it is the mask worn by Rose's family that proves the more deadly of the two. This widely accepted soft racism shows the type of burden dealt to those people who happen to be born with a different skin tone, through Chris's paranoia as the film progresses. In this way, the movie effectively portrays the struggles of being black in American society in a way that connects with all audiences. On the opposite side of the spectrum lies films like Moonlight, where an all-black cast can shine in stories that reflect masculinity, sexuality, and the many struggles that are faced by African Americans in today's society. Separate from the institution of slavery, Moonlight allows for a film about African Americans that does not revolve strictly around racism. Donald Glover's Atlanta is another example. Across the show's 10 episodes, Atlanta takes us through the city and introduces its people in a diverse cast that tackle issues such as trans identity as it relates to both gender and race, celebrity culture, police brutality, mental health, and the ethics of gun violence in black culture.
While common trends of discrimination and racism in American cinematic media are being reversed, many years of problematic portrayals of minorities will forever remain as proof of a historically prejudiced system. It falls upon future filmmakers and content producers to more accurately portray the daily lives and struggles faced by minorities living in America,